Hello，你好，Welcome back，欢迎回来 to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger on June 22nd, 2022. And yes, I have to say it again, 2022 and then 22nd, yeah, 222022. Very nice symmetry to that. Of course, I say that every month when we get to the 22nd. Uh, anyway, just a little bit of a geeky side of me coming up. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the main staples of Chinese people. Uh, I can't remember it was the last episode or the episode before that I talked about the Chinese mustard green. And that was a definite staple for Chinese people for a long time. And today I'm going to talk about yet another vegetable that you will see in Chinese restaurants all over the place. And you'll see it being used whether in stir fry, whether in hot pot, whether in dumpling, pot sticker, Chinese buns. It has so many uses, and it is a truly symbolic vegetable for Chinese people. The vegetable I'm talking about is commonly called Chinese cabbage, or most of the time on the menu it will just say cabbage. In Mandarin, it is called bai cai. Bai cai, Baichai. Bai means white, cai means veggie. So the white veggie. It is named so because it is kind of pale white color towards the center. The Chinese people call that white veggie, bai cai. In Japanese, it is called napa. So some people will also call it the napa cabbage. Whether it's a napa cabbage or Chinese cabbage, it is the same thing. It is bai cai. So here are the six things that you might not know about bai cai or Chinese cabbage. Why is it so important that I do an episode on? And is it really all that important that you need to know that much about Chinese cabbage? Well, okay, no, you don't really need to know these things. I don't really need to talk about these things, but I thought they're very interesting. And Bai Cai has been such a big part of my culture that it is uh, something that deserves a spot on Wisdom Wednesday. So let's get to it. Number one, you do not pick cabbage. Yeah, you know, city boys like myself grow up saying things like, "Oh, okay, so and so is gone back to the farm to pick cabbage," or that it is time this time of the year. A lot of people are picking cabbage. Uh, but that's just us being city people. Country folks would know that you actually don't pick cabbage. You can pick carrot, you can pick potato, you can pick strawberry, you can pick even pumpkin, but you can't pick cabbage. Honestly, if you know anyone who's growing cabbage, I don't mean baby cabbage. I mean like the big ones, like Chinese cabbage, bai cai, like we're talking about. Wait until it is ready to be used. Wait until it is ripe for the picking, and ask your friend if they will let you try picking it. And I guarantee you, you can be Mr. Universe, and you can't pick it. It just uh, it grows really, really deep. The stem, the roots go so deep into the ground that it's like trying to pull a tree out of the ground. It's not possible to pick cabbage. On the off chance that you are some kind of genetic biological freak that you actually is able to pull one out of the ground, like picking a carrot, it would take so much energy that pretty much going to be it. One cabbage, two cabbage, you are out for the day. You're not going to be able to complete the entire field, pick the entire field. So the proper term really is to cut cabbage, because when people harvest cabbage, the farmer have to go into the field and grab the cabbage with under one arm, like they're giving a big headlock to this cabbage, and then they take their machete in the other hand and then go chopsy on the stem of the cabbage. So that is how cabbage is harvested. You don't pick it, you gotta chop it off at the stem. And this also gave rise to a little, we can say, more sad and dark part of Chinese history, where there are a lot of there were a lot of poor people uh, that couldn't afford food, couldn't afford to buy enough food for their family. They didn't have a farm, they didn't have a field. So a lot of times these poor people would wait until the farmer finished their harvesting of cabbage, and then they would go into the cabbage field and pick up the cabbage leaves that were dropped, and then they would go into the ground with spade and trowels and dig up the stems that were left in the dirt and take those home and try to eat those and make soup or make kimchi, make preserved uh, cabbage with them. So yeah, the farmers knew that, but they didn't care. I mean, they got a good part of the cabbage. So if the poor people want to come and dig up the stems, that's fine. So that is number one. You do not pick cabbage. You have to cut them. Number two, cabbage was a lot more important to Chinese people than you or I might have imagined. Imagine this. Uh, Imagine you go to your employer today and say, "Hey, I need a week off because I need to go buy some cabbage from the supermarket, and I'm going to be really busy storing them and canning them and pickling them. I won't be able to come into work." I imagine your employer would not be very gracious about that. Most likely, they're going to say no. However, even as recently as in the 50s or 60s, this was a perfectly legit uh, excuse to get a week off or 2 weeks off. Because back then, there's really not a lot of availability for other vegetables for most people that don't want to spend an arm and a leg to buy vegetable in the wintertime. So you're kind of down to mustard green or cabbage. So in the middle of October, when the cabbage was harvested and huge trucks came into town with mountains and mountains of cabbage, this was the time when you have to go buy them before they were gone, because you need to store enough cabbage for your family for the entire winter. Otherwise, you're going to end up running out of vegetable, running out of greens, or running out of nutrient for the winter. So back in the 50s or 40s, you can perfectly go to your employer and say, "Hey, the cabbage are coming tomorrow. I need to go take care of this. Okay, me and the kid, we're going to drive into town. We're going to go buy enough cabbage for the winter, and then we're going to spend the rest of the week taking care of them. We got to can them and put them in jars and stuff like that. So, yeah, I won't be able to come into work." And the employer back then would be like, "Oh, okay, okay, I'm just happened I'm going too. You want some help? You need an extra pair of hand, or you got a bicycle, you got a shopping cart, you got a truck. You want to use the one at work? Yeah, it's okay. Go Take whatever you need. Because it's such a necessity that for the employer to say no, it would be inhumane. That would be the quickest way to lose workers if you deny them their days off to go take care of the winter cabbage storage. So, speaking of winter cabbage storage, how did it all go down? Well, so let's say you get your day off, and the next thing you need to do is make sure you have uh, transportation because we are talking about a lot of cabbage you need to get. So you're going to town, wait for the big truck to show up, and you negotiate with the farmer for how much cabbage you want to buy, how much it's going to you're willing to pay, and you find a way to get these cabbage home. Now you can't store them away right away because they are at this point they're kind of still fresh and kind of wet. If you store them now, they're going to get moldy or rot. So you want to leave them out in the sun for a few days, so uh, at least they're not so wet. And then you find a nice, cool place, maybe a cellar or some part of your backyard that is relatively clean. You lay down a tarp on the floor. You lay the cabbage together, stack them up, the big one on the bottom, the small one on the top. Make sure you don't pack them together too tight because there's no ventilation. If they are too tightly packed, they are going to get moldy. And you don't want them to be too loosely packed either because if they're too loose, they're going to freeze in the wintertime. You do not want frozen cabbage. So you want them to be relatively close but not too tight together. Then you put an old blanket over them to keep them from freezing and then a plastic tarp over that to prevent rainwater from getting inside. And then you make sure that all the edges of the plastic tarp is uh, weighed down by brick or rock. And there you have it. That is your winter cabbage pile. Whenever you want some cabbage, whether for soup or for stir fry or for canning or pickling, you go uh, under the tarp and get the take them from the top and make sure you get the tarp back. Otherwise, they're going to spoil. So it was very, very commonplace back in the 40s and 50s and 60s for Chinese household to have a cabbage pile or a cabbage hump, as they call it. Uh, it's just a big tarp with a lot of cabbage underneath it. Number three, Chinese people ate way more cabbage or baicai than we might have imagined. So if I ask you how much do you think a Chinese family would eat, how much cabbage would eat, uh, this is how much. Okay, this there were surveys done in 1950, and the result was, on average, a family of four from October all the way through to February. So October, November, December, January, February, 4 or 5 months for a family of four would consume up to, brace yourself for this, 400 pounds of cabbage. Like when I saw this number, I was like, holy crap! My people are like rabbits. They went through cabbage like rabbits. Um, so yeah, they ate a lot of it. Like I said, back then that was one of the very few available uh, produce in the wintertime. So people really stock up on cabbage. Number four, Chinese cabbage may grow a lot bigger than you imagine. when we go to the supermarket nowadays, we see cabbage. I go, okay, even if you see a big one, how big can it get? Most of them is like a pound, 2 pound. Uh, okay, let's say you find a giant one, 5 pound. Okay, if you can find a 5 pound bai cai, 5 pound Chinese cabbage, that's huge in the store. But it get a lot bigger. Chinese cabbage is one of those produce that grow. The colder it is, the better they grow. So logically, the further north in China, the better the cabbage you'll find. The best cabbage come from Shandong province, from a county called Zhaozhou. Zhaozhou cabbage is the most famous cabbage in the entire China. And Zhaozhou cabbage is so big, they regularly grow over 30, 35 pounds. They're so big that children have been seen standing on them, jumping on them like they were trampolines, and the cabbage are okay. They can hold up the weight of a child. Like, yeah, that is some big cabbage. Number five, cabbage is a lot more fancy than we might have imagined. People like my father, who hates vegetable, by the way, uh, when you when you mention cabbage in front of him, he thinks that's pig food. He thinks that's like food for poor people. But cabbage is a lot more than that. Now, for most commoners like you and I, when we eat cabbage, there's a few ways to do it. The tougher outer leaves of the cabbage, the tougher outer leaves are great for using in pickling, turning them into kimchi, or pickled preserved vegetable. The tender inner heart of the cabbage, that's what you use in hot pot and ramen noodle and soup. Oh, that's so good. And no, we're not done yet. The stem is good too. Now the stem is like super tough. So what you want to do is you want to peel them with a potato peeler, so you remove the outer layer, and then the inside of the stem you cut it into shred. You shred it like you're shredding potato, and then you can stir fry with the inside part of the stem, and that come out kind of like bamboo shoot or asparagus. It has that kind of consistency. It's pretty nice. So yeah, almost the entire cabbage is useful. You just have to cook it different ways. However, like I said, that's for normal people like you and I. Cabbage is currently still on the menu of the Chinese national feast. Whenever they want to have a national feast to welcome dignitaries from foreign countries, there's one dish that always appears, which is the boiled cabbage. Okay, I think I know what you're thinking. Boiled cabbage. That sounds really boring, right? Yeah, I know. Let me digress a little bit and take you back to my teenage years. I was in high school and I had a friend who just recently came from China, and he was one of the first people I've ever met that came from China. I mostly met, I knew Cantonese people, I knew Taiwanese people. I didn't know a lot of actual Chinese people. So I still remember his name. His name was Frank. And Frank uh, told me that he's going to cook dinner one night. He wanted to cook dinner for me and my siblings. And I said, okay, what are we having? And Frank said, I'm going to treat you guys to. boiled cabbage. And yeah, I admit I kind of rolled my eyes and I was like, Frank, I know how to boil cabbage. Like that, you just boil water and you just boil cabbage. That doesn't sound very appetizing. Frank said, I know. You guys are all the same. Whenever you hear boiled cabbage, you think it's boiled cabbage. Just wait and see. At the dinner table, he came up with this pot of boiled cabbage, and I tried it with some rice, and I went, Holy Mother of God, this is good. This is not what I imagined when I heard boiled cabbage. Okay, so boiled cabbage, like I said, is still on the national feast in China. And there's a reason because it obviously is more than boiled cabbage. You do not boil it in water to start with. You have to cook it in a broth from chicken broth. You have to cook it in chicken broth, and then after you cook the cabbage, you serve it over rice, and then you put vinegar, hot sauce, and soy sauce over the cabbage. So the cabbage that have been soaking in that chicken broth have that meaty chicken flavor inside, and then when you put vinegar and hot sauce and a little bit of soy sauce on it, that is just so good. And it's something that you can even try it at home yourself. Okay, there you go. It's almost becoming a tradition. I'm going to give you a random recipe on a Wisdom Wednesday. um, Even back in the Qing Dynasty, back in imperial days, the emperors had cabbage on the national feast. When they had a national feast for the emperors and the royalties, there's cabbage being used in lamb hot pot. There's cabbage being used in fish stir fry. So it was something that the emperor himself really enjoyed. Speaking of which, the emperors of China enjoyed their cabbage so much that there was actually a law that every year when October came around, before the farmers could start selling cabbage, they have to hold a cabbage competition. Every county would have to have a cabbage competition. And the king and queen, they would pick out two of the biggest and best cabbage out of every county. The king and queen cabbage would then be loaded onto a wagon and be delivered to the imperial city. Um, the best of the best would be sent to the emperor, so the emperor would have enough cabbage for the winter months. Number six, last but not least, cabbage was not only used as a source of food, cabbage was also a common household decoration. And no, I don't mean you just put a head of cabbage in a vase and put it on the table. What you want to do is after you uh, cut off the leaves and use what you're going to use, you save one portion of the stem, and you save one portion of the stem, and then you put that in a dish of water and just leave it be. After about 10 days, it will start to grow sprout and it will start to grow flower, these beautiful little yellow flowers. And for a lot of people that couldn't afford household decorations, this was something colorful, something natural for you to look at when you're uh, inside, when it's snowing outside and there's nowhere to go. It's something you can look at. And if you want to take this up to another level, then I'm going to show you how to make a Chinese carrot and cabbage lamp. Okay, it's not actually a lamp. It's a kind of flower pot. What you do is you take a carrot and you cut it in half from the middle, horizontally. The bottom half, the part that have the root, you save that for food. Okay, we don't need that. The top part, the head, the pointy part of the carrot, you take a knife and carefully hollow out a little bit of the bottom on the inside. Now you take that carrot, put it in a bowl of water, and then you take that cabbage stem and put it beside it in a bowl of water. And then you uh, put wires around the bowl so you can hang it on the wall. And yeah, just leave it there 10 days or 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. The cabbage start to grow upward and sprouting yellow flowers. The carrot start to grow downward and start sprouting white flower. It's really, really pretty to look at. Okay, again, something that you can try at home if you want to go and buy a carrot and cabbage. Now, obviously, it's not going to work if these things have been frozen and stuff like that. But yeah, just buy fresh produce and you can experiment making your own Chinese carrot and cabbage lamp at home. So there you have it, six little things that you might not have known about Chinese cabbage. I hope that this episode, if not strictly educational, at least was entertaining. I'll be back again tomorrow for some Toy Thursday, and for now, 谢谢 and 再见.